Hi, I'm Ron Turner. Welcome back to the Constitution in a Nutshell. Before we get to the Constitution itself, we need to look at the Declaration of Independence, written in 1776, and the Articles of Confederation, written in 1777. And then we'll look at the Constitution itself, written in 1787. So our story starts in 1776. There were 13 English colonies along the eastern seaboard: Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, etc. A meeting was called in 1776 in Philadelphia. Who was there? Why was the meeting called, and what did they do? Well, 56 delegates from all 13 colonies were called to meet in Philadelphia because the tension had been building for about 25 years or more between Great Britain and the colonies. They had had enough. Finally, the colonists were saying, should we break away and form our own nation? What are we going to do? Actually, fighting had started in 1775. People had been killed. The British Navy was in American harbors. The British Army was being quartered in American homes against the people's consent, so they had had enough. They met in the summer of 1776 and decided to break away. So what did they do next? Well, they formed 3 committees. Sounds like a church, doesn't it? The first committee that was formed was to create the new government. What's this new government going to look like? That's the committee everybody wanted to be on. That's where the action was going to be. The second committee was a little less popular. It was to talk about how they're going to interact with other countries. And then the third committee, the least popular, was to come up with some type of announcement, we might call it a press release nowadays, telling the world what they had done and why they had done it. The third committee was the one that not many people wanted to serve on. Luckily, Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, 2 of the best known delegates, did agree to serve on it. And 2 others that are less well known, Robert Livingston and Robert Sherman, were on the committee. But the last one was a young 33-year-old lawyer from Virginia named Thomas Jefferson, not very well known except in his home colony. He did have a reputation as a good writer, so the other committee members asked him if he would come up with the press release. He called it a Declaration of Independence, and he broke it down into 3 sections. The first section deals with the fact that the 13 colonies and the people living in them have rights. Secondly, King George, the King of England, had abused his power and trampled on those rights, and therefore the colonies have a right to be free. Let's look at the language itself. Some of this may sound a little familiar to you. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. Whenever the government becomes destructive of these ends, that is, protecting our rights, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Notice the use of the term power and rights. Balancing power, who has it, and rights, whose rights are being trampled on by the abuse of power, is a common theme we're going to see throughout this course. The history of the present King of Great Britain is absolute tyranny. He's a tyrant. What's he done to us? He's made judges dependent on his will. He's rendered the military superior to the civil power, and it should be the other way around. He's subjected us to taxes without our consent. You've heard of taxation without representation. He's deprived us of trial by jury, and we've petitioned for redress. Remember that phrase, you're going to see it again. In other words, we've asked for some relief from all of this abuse, and they've just answered that by repeated injury. We therefore declare that these united colonies are free, and all political connection between them and Great Britain is dissolved. So now what? Can you imagine that? That took a lot of guts. You're standing up to the strongest military power in the world, and you're saying, all right, we've had enough, we're free. Well, guess who now has a war on their hands? The colonies have poked the bear, folks. They're going to try to decide, how is this new government going to be organized? Who's going to have the power under the new government? And how will rights be protected? The first committee that was created was to decide how to organize this new U.S. government. And what they came up with was a confederation, not a nation. What's the difference between a confederation and a nation? A nation is a single unified body. A confederation is a loose organization of independent bodies. And that's what they've come up with. Because they have 13 colonies that are now 13 very independent states, they want to maintain that independence. The second question was, under this new confederation, who's going to have the power? The states will have the power. Not one person, not a king, not a tyrant, nor a central government. Each state will have power. And how will rights be protected? Through the states. States' rights will come first. Let's look at the Articles of Confederation. That's the document that they came up with, and they signed it in 1777. Article 1, this confederacy shall be the United States of America. Now that's probably a surprise. When you hear the word confederacy, what do you think of? The southern states that seceded in 1861. Well, the United States, for its first 10 years in existence, was actually a confederacy, a loose organization of 13 independent states. Article 2 says it. Each state retains its sovereignty and independence. Article 3, the states enter into a firm league of friendship. That's a perfect description of a confederacy. Article 5, each state shall have one vote. There was a Congress, and in Congress, each of the 13 states had an equal vote. Rhode Island, the smallest state, had the same power in Congress and the same vote as Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York, the largest states. Article 13, the Articles of Confederation shall be perpetual. We, the undersigned delegates, ratify and confirm each of these articles and perpetual union. Now, there were some problems under the Articles of Confederation, serious problems. The first is how weak Congress was. When you have 13 states and each one has an equal vote, and many of the votes have to be unanimous according to the Articles, or certainly need 9 out of 13 votes, it's hard to get those little states and those big states to agree. Secondly, there was no separate judiciary, no separate court system or president. Now, there was a position of president, but he was basically a committee chairman. The third weakness, and probably the most significant, was there was no common currency. Each of the 13 states issued its own money. Well, as a result, the United States was almost bankrupt. Remember, from 1776 until 1781, we fought a Revolutionary War. And we won it despite all these weaknesses. It was basically a miracle that we did, because Congress had trouble funding the Army and the Navy. They had trouble coming up with it because it was made up primarily of people who were in the different state militias. We won the war in 1781, but then these problems we've been talking about led to complete financial collapse. Finally, in 1786, things came to a head with something called Shay's Rebellion. A group of veterans, farmers in Pennsylvania, got together and stormed a federal arsenal and took some weapons. They had it, they were going to fight back. Well, the militia was sent in and they put the rebellion down. But believe it or not, some of the people in the militia actually joined the folks who were rebelling because they hadn't been paid either. Okay, things had come to a head and something had to be done. So another meeting was called in Philadelphia in 1787 to deal with all of these problems that had arisen under the Articles of Confederation. That's what we'll look at in the next session. I'm really glad that you're joining me on this journey. Please add any comments, positive, negative, or otherwise, in the comments section, and click that like button below if you like what you're seeing. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more lessons in this particular series, and share it with your friends. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.